If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, white supremacy may destroy itself due to its internal contradictions, but just because the bad guys are on self-destruct does not mean that they cannot take us with them, so we need to understand the nature of the fight that we're in. White supremacy is determined to make certain that it gives immunity from law to all of those who it classifies as white, and the reason why is very simple. You have to maintain some semblance of real, tangible benefits. Otherwise, who the hell is going to fight for a system like that? Well, except for a lot of old, decrepit Negroes. You see, the bad guys are caught on the horns of a dilemma. The problem that they have is that by going centuries deciding that they're going to have a racial caste system, with those classified as white as being immune from law, while those classified as black are persecuted morning, noon, and night, the problem that comes out of that is, well, if you treat people as if the law doesn't apply to them long enough, they start getting the idea that they'll be damned if the law ever applies to them. Now, what would you expect to happen when a group of people who have spent hundreds of years immune from the law decide that they're going to disagree on any little thing? Almost immediately what's going to happen is they're going to say, I'm not doing it and there's nothing you can do about it. After all, I'm immune from all law. I'm immune from all consequences. The domestic expression of this, of course, is the infamous Karen. The international version would be the ugly American tourist. But at the far end, though, what you get are those who decide that they're going to go shoot up the courthouse or that they're going to go storm the Capitol because, well, they figure that they don't like something that happened and they have a right to, and why not? It's not like there's going to be any consequences. So white supremacy is in a situation where it needs to crack down on those who it classifies as white, but they're freezing because they're trying to figure out, how do we restore peace in the family? I put peace in quotes, without doing anything about them. How do we stop white supremacy while preserving it at the exact same time? There's nothing new about this dilemma. Abraham Lincoln was quoted as having said, this, talking about the Civil War, is not a war to free the slaves, but to preserve the Union. Now, we need to define terms so we can understand this little witticism. When he says free the slaves, who was he talking about? Talking about Asian immigrants? Was he talking about Latinos? Was he talking about Irish who were trying to escape the potato famine? When he was talking about slaves, who specifically did he mean? He meant black people. He could have just said that, but of course, that's one of the white supremacy's favorite little tactics, which is, well, we don't just come up the middle. We must be duplicitous after all. We have to make sure to maintain the duplicity. And then talking about preserve the Union. Who the hell's Union? Black people had no stake in it, and nobody else had any control over it or influence over it. So when he said Union, who the hell's Union was it? It was the Union of white supremacy. It was white people's union. So when we actually take Lincoln's little expression and put it in its proper context and become specific instead of being conveniently vague, what did Lincoln actually say? This is not a war to free black people, but to maintain white unity. That's what Abraham Lincoln was actually saying. And everybody understood that that's what he was saying. They could give less than a damn about whether or not black people were free. In fact, they were opposed to it. But the problem that they had was, well, there were going to have to be a couple of minor cosmetic changes if they were going to maintain white unity. After all, we can't forget who the real enemy here is, so no matter what happens, we got to move forward with malice toward none. And this has been the MO of white supremacy, especially in America, ever since. No matter what happens, no matter how severe their disagreements with one another may be, at the end of the day, we got to maintain white unity, because otherwise, how are we going to maintain the racial pecking order that we put in place and make sure that black people remain in their place? White power is under pressure, and a lot of it. Their hand-picked bootlicks are being robbed of their effectiveness. White supremacy is based on anti-black racism, which means they have to control black people here in the United States. Everybody around the world saw the uprisings of 2020, and you better believe there were a lot of phone calls and communications that came to the U.S. from all of these European countries telling the good white folks in D.C., you better get control of those Negroes because the rest of the world's seeing this and it's making things hot globally. The U.S. sets the tone for the world, but when it comes to righteous opposition to control, it's black folks in the United States who are the tip of the spear. Oh, hell, tip of the spear. We are the tip of the spear, the shaft of the spear, and every other part of it. So you better believe last year there were all kinds of white heads of state who were calling up the orange man and calling up the Democrats and making it very clear, you got to do something about this because this threatens all of us. It's like the Haitian Revolution. The United States was sending communications to France telling Napoleon, hey, you want some help dealing with this? I mean, if you lose control of those niggers down in Haiti, it's going to go bad for all of us because an example of an unoppressed group of black people would give ideas to the oppressed ones. To see an example of black people who successfully overthrew white rule, well, we don't want that to become habit forming. And you better believe they all especially understood that the old bootlick Negroes, especially these pork chop preachers who the left arm of white supremacy has had on the payroll for the longest time, these bastards showed they have no stroke, no influence, ain't nobody listening to them. The youth have completely and thoroughly turned their backs on them. Oh yeah, for a long time you had the black baby boomers taking marching orders from these black misleaders who the white powers that be picked and pushed to us in the first place. But there was a younger generation now who paid them no never mind. Nobody was listening to the old crap about, well, you should not defend yourselves against white supremacy. Instead, you should pray about it and you should insist that these white supremacists, that these white supremacists feel the love of Jesus. You should never insist that the white supremacists be punished to our satisfaction. That the racist prosecutors and judges and legislators who oppress us day and night actually be punished. Or that black people have a right to defend themselves, and that we have a right to produce justice when no justice exists. You don't have that right. Or at least that's what they thought. But the whole world saw an example of black folks rising up last year, imposing our will on the white supremacists, getting in the thugs with badges' faces, confronting them at their precincts, and making it a point to pull up. So it is against this backdrop that we see white supremacy attempting to reinforce and otherwise prop up those essential bonds of corruption. The white supremacists sending the message out loud and clear that, hey, we need to remember what team we're on, team white supremacy. We need to remind folks of the tangible benefits that go along with being classified as white and propping up the white supremacist system. Just let's make sure we don't forget who's supposed to be in charge here and that it's us against them. This week we had none other than arch pervert and race baiter Jeffrey Toobin, the clown who popularized the phrase race card. Well, CNN's decided to put him back on the air. Now, keep in mind, Jeffrey Toobin got himself otherwise excused from CNN's studios because he had gone on a Zoom call and decided that he would put on his own webcam show. Tragically, Mr. Toobin's planned secondary career as an OnlyFans model died soon thereafter. But not before the little muskrat-looking weasel made international headlines. I mean, it's not every day that you got this pompous jackass who has been making excuses for police killing black people for the better part of 25 years and CNN loving every minute of it. Well, of course, corrupt people can't keep their corruption hidden for long. Sooner or later, it always becomes public and blows up in their faces. But everybody got to see Jeffrey Toobin for who and what he is, and it's no surprise that Practically nobody outside of his immediate circle in the white media likes him. In fact, even they don't like him. They don't even respect him. But he is willing to sling the soap, or rather sling the slime, for white supremacy against black people. And that's basically all he needs to do. That's what his job is. Nobody expects him to say anything intelligent, and he's certainly never surprised us on that one. But everybody got to go ahead and point and say, yeah, Jeffrey Toobin, you're looking real good now. Hell, even O.J. Simpson got to get in on the action. Talk about poetic justice. For a little while, it seemed that Jeffrey Jerkin-it Toobin was going to be joining his pal Mark Halperin, another race baiter, doing permanent rounds of golf or having 3 martini lunches, whatever these white supremacists do whenever they no longer have time to be on CNN or MSNBC spouting their inane opinions. But to be honest, I think that most of us did not seriously believe that Jeffrey Toobin was going to be gone forever. Just put him on ice and then try to figure out some way to bring him back. Hell, MSNBC's even putting Chris Matthews back on the occasional guest commentary spot on their shows. But with Jeffrey Toobin, of course, there was a little bit of extra preparatory work that had to be done. They had Allison Camerata, who I thought was really bothered by these males who couldn't keep their rockets in their pockets. Well, apparently she wasn't too bothered. She was the one who they decided they would have her handle the let's deal with the elephant in the room moment. Again, this is white supremacy's one of their favorite tactics, giving themselves permission, bestowing innocence upon themselves for something that they want to do or want to see happen. Oh, our anchor people or our frequent guests, whomever, have said some racist stuff against black people. Well, we're going to say some sort of insincere, phony mea culpa, and we're moving on. We're not discussing it anymore. We're giving ourselves permission to flush this down the memory hole. And as far as we're concerned, we're done with it. That's one of the things that they like to do. They like to bestow innocence upon themselves. Oh, no, what do you mean we need to say we're sorry? We're not saying anything. As far as we're concerned, we're going to give our explanation for too bad if any of you were offended, and we're moving on. We're done. Oh, we don't have to justify anything that we do. If the bastards over at CNN wanted for old Jeffrey Toobin to be giving some sort of explanation, he can explain all the anti-black race baiting that he's been doing. But truth be told, A, I wouldn't be inclined to hear anything from that duplicitous weasel's forked tongue. And B, there is no excuse for anti-black racism. But again, what we're seeing is that some of these old half-shoe bigots who have been running around, the white media is making it very clear that these guys are getting a pass. White media is making it very clear that these guys are going to be back on. Meanwhile, out in the media ghetto of the wilderness, you got clowns like Roly-Poly Martin sitting there going, God dang, I don't believe this. I don't believe that scumbag Toobin, he got caught playing with himself on webcam. And they sat there, they sat there and said we washing our hands of him, and now they bring the son of a bitch back. And me, I can't even get my phone calls returned. Well, this is Roly-Poly we're talking about here. He only curses at black folks. He only decides to get foul and vulgar with black folks. So I think that he would probably not say that, especially not about a white person, but you get the idea. Yeah, it really doesn't matter what you're doing. If the white media's made up their minds, you got the complexion for the protection. But this is meant to send a signal to people that, hey, no matter how bad some of these things may seem to be, hell, even Al Franken's making the rounds again. Yeah, well, under white supremacy, we can't be firing people. We're supposed to move them around, put them on ice for a little bit, but there's no permanent consequences. Otherwise, you are damaging the brand. You are damaging the very cohesion that white supremacy requires. But of course, its sharpest expression has been seen with the reaction, or rather lack thereof, of the Biden Justice Department to the January 6th insurrectionists. On my Twitter page today, I posted about how you had some of the Oath Keepers who had been acting as a rear echelon for the January 6th attack. What these guys did was they were the ones who brought the hardware to town. They brought assault rifles with them. sniper rifles with them. These guys were bringing firearms. Now, they didn't go to the Capitol. What they did instead was they went to a nearby hotel, and they used that hotel as a staging area for where they brought their weapons to. You see, that was supposed to be phase 2 of the insurrection. I told you about that also on my Twitter page, about how the plan was supposed to be that the white supremacist oath keepers would go to D.C., they would cause a riot, and of course the Republicans and such would say, it's Antifa, it's Black Lives Matter. Surely it can't be these guys with the oath keeper patches on their shirts. That certainly can't be them. And what would happen is Donald Trump, responding to the riot that the Oath Keepers had put in motion, he would declare a state of emergency, an insurrection, and would call up a militia. All able-bodied white men with a gun need to come to D.C. And that would be when Jason Dolan and his pals, who had their assault rifles at the hotel, that would be when they would make their move. They were all ready for it, caught on hotel cameras and everything. So this guy, Jason Dolan, I mean, hell, if anybody needs to be locked up, he and his pals do. But, of course, this is white supremacy, so the judge decided to release Dolan. The only condition of his release is he has to give up whatever firearms he has. Judge felt that, he has no criminal history. So, that being the case, do you really think that they checked to see if this guy's got any priors? But of course, they're looking and going, well, we don't want to be punishing anybody who's classified as white, mind you. That would set a bad precedent. So what we're going to do instead is we're letting him go. And all he has to do is to make sure he hands over any weapons. We'll take his word for it. We're not going to check to make sure. We'll just take his word for it. And as long as he promises not to get into any more trouble, the prosecutor should probably look for a plea deal. It was the prosecutors, by the way, who were trying to get this guy locked up. Because what had happened was, in a prior hearing, you had a prior court who had said that Jason Dolan and his pals, that these guys need to be released on bond. And the prosecutors were trying to keep these guys held, but the second court decided, well, we're sticking with that. So what that lets you know is white supremacy is so determined to maintain white immunity from law that they're going to eat themselves alive and encourage and embolden the very individuals who will try to kill them later. You got guys who you got caught on camera bringing assault rifles to the nation's capital, which, by the way, I was told that trying to do something like that is a violation of the law. At least that's what I was told. But of course, the judge is looking and going, you have not one but two courts who are looking and saying these guys should be released. Oh, why? They've got no criminal history. How differently these gun-toting white supremacist traitors and terrorists were treated than the innocent, defenseless freedom fighters in Baltimore and Ferguson, huh? You don't see anybody calling these white supremacist thugs a bunch of thugs like Obama did to the young black folks fighting for their lives in Baltimore. You don't see President Biden deciding that he's going to call these guys thugs. Or you can chalk that one up to white supremacist professional courtesy. White supremacists who stormed the Capitol are being released left and right by the judges under the lie that they have no criminal record or that they're not deemed as a flight risk. These bastards tried to overthrow the government. And while that is serious, what needs to be understood is that's not at the top of white supremacy's list of worst case scenarios. The fall of white supremacy, that would be the worst thing to happen to them. Losing their power would be the worst thing to happen to them. That's how you get somebody like a Vladimir Putin who says that it was not World War II, but the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was the greatest tragedy to befall Russia. It was not the loss of millions and millions of lives during the Second World War, Russian lives. You could truthfully say that the Second World War was one paid for in Russian blood. Putin did not say that it was Stalin's purges that was the greatest tragedy to befall Russia. No, loss of life was not the greatest tragedy to befall them. The loss of their power following the end of the Cold War, that was the greatest tragedy as Vladimir Putin sees it. Maintaining power, not their own survival, not even their own personal survival, is important to them. Maintaining power is what matters. And without that, as far as they're concerned, survival becomes meaningless. And Putin's not the only one. After the American Civil War, I told you about how Abraham Lincoln and his Justice Department, they did the same thing that Biden's been doing with the January 6th insurrectionists. We're not prosecuting anybody, let everybody go. Robert Lee, the leader of the Confederate forces, he is a leader of the Oath Keepers of his day. What did they do to him? Let him go. Robert Lee wound up washing up on the fetid shores of Princeton University. He decided to become a teacher there. They let him become a teacher there. Jefferson Davis did a little bit of time in the Hoosgow, but that's okay. They let him go, and he went back to Virginia, where he started rabble-rousing the exact same type of rhetoric that kicked off the Civil War in the first place. No penalties of any sort. Everybody just being let go. It didn't really matter. We're trying to move on, mind you. We're trying to move forward and past all this. That didn't start just with Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy. This has been going on for 150 years in this country at least. The idea that we must maintain immunity from law because we need to have tangible benefits for those classified as white. We take any bricks away from that wall and the whole damn thing comes down, so we got to handle this real carefully, don't you know? But white supremacy is a global system. You see white supremacy's insistence on immunity from all law and punishment and consequences around the world. Take Germany as an example. A lot of people have been pointing out that the January 6th insurrection failed just like Hitler's Beer Hall Putsch failed. By the way, that happened in 1923, almost 100 years ago. History is repeating itself almost word for word and beat for beat. See, after the First World War, which was only a few years earlier, you had a lot of German veterans like Adolf Hitler. He had been a corporal in the First World War. Some of his running buddies and such like Ernst Röhm, who had been a captain in the First World War. You had a whole bunch of these former military vets running around. And the reason that they went to the beer hall was because you had a whole lot of defeated German vets who came back home and they were demoralized and humiliated and going to the local beer hall to drown their troubles in alcohol. Whole lot of veterans sitting around sloppy drunk reminiscing about a war from a few years ago, how things would have been different if only the weak leadership had not been so pathetic and spineless. Perfect breeding ground for a demagogue to find a whole bunch of like-minded fools who would help him go and do something stupid. So Adolf Hitler got these vets and also police officers sounding just like the Oath Keepers, doesn't it? A whole bunch of German vets and former and current police officers in Germany deciding we need to make a statement. So they did the Beer Hall Putsch, where they were basically declaring we're overthrowing the government. Hitler even decided that he would take the Munich City Council prisoners. He went and arrested the mayor, arrested the Munich City Council. See, that's the part they don't tell you about. This is important because last year in Minnesota, you had the weak, spineless governor there, Whitmer. She decided that, well, there wasn't a whole lot that she wanted to do about these white supremacists who came into the Michigan State Capitol with assault rifles, screaming at the police. Nobody's doing anything. Nobody's arresting anyone. No one's saying a damn word about it. Well, hopefully they'll just calm down. Terry McAuliffe, governor of Virginia, when the Proud Boys went on a rampage there, he decided, you guys, we don't want your kind around here. You know, you're not welcome here. What about punishment? Punishment, hell, we just tell them they're not welcome. We're withdrawing the welcome mat. That'll do it. Point that I'm making is even Hitler understood that if you're going to call yourself trying to stage a coup d'etat, you might want to have a dress rehearsal first. That's what the Beer Hall Putsch was about. They weren't ready to do anything nationally, but they showed that the heart was there. The will to do it was there. And what was the German government's response to this attempted insurrection? What did the German government do about it? Well, what they did about it was basically they gave slaps on the wrist to practically all involved. Hitler himself got put on trial. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. 5 years for treason. Imagine that. What was the penalty for treason? Well, 100 years ago in Germany, if you decide to overthrow the government, 5 years was enough, but that's okay. He was out in 8 months. I wonder if the judge or the parole board or whomever looked and said, well, he doesn't have any criminal history, so we might as well go ahead and let him go. I mean, all he tried to do was to overthrow the government. Some people got killed, and they took the mayor of Munich along with the city council hostage. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, how rough do you want to be on him for that? I mean, this is not much more than the equivalent of a speeding violation, isn't it? You got a guy who stages an insurrection. People get killed, including police officers, by the way. He takes government officials hostage, and the government of Germany decided they weren't going to do anything about it. That was the end of the Weimar Republic right there. They didn't know it, but they had committed suicide in that very moment. Showing weakness in the face of white supremacy is the surest way to ensure that you become its next victim. Hitler was so contemptuous of the German government's refusal to punish him, even he was running around saying, hell, look how weak these bastards are. If I was in charge and somebody had tried something like this with me, I would have them summarily executed, which, of course, if you read your history, you know that did happen. Operation Valkyrie, where some German officers attempted to kill then Chancellor Hitler. The plot to kill Hitler failed. Hitler then had all the coup plotters rounded up and summarily executed. You see, Adolf Hitler didn't make the mistake that the Weimar government made when dealing with his insurrection. He made it very clear, you try to overthrow my government, I'm going to punish it harshly and make sure that nobody does it again. Nobody's going to be able to try to overthrow me. But if the Weimar Republic government had actually punished Hitler, had him executed, make sure to round up his buddies and put them in front of a firing squad as well, imprison the bastards, make sure they spend the rest of their days in a cage, World War II would not have happened. They could have stopped it before it even occurred. But because of the principle of white immunity from punishment, white immunity from consequence, since that's the law of white supremacy, the glue that holds them together, because you have to maintain that in order to have the unity that they need, well, they decided that they couldn't do anything about a government coup that almost had them killed. Just because the guy starts rounding up politicians and makes it clear we're going to start having them posing for pictures in front of the firing squad, well, that's not enough to actually do anything about them. Oh yeah, there are a lot of eerie similarities between the January 6th insurrection and Hitler's Beer Hall Putsch. In fact, do you know what the name was of the political opposition party in Germany at that time who was supposed to be standing up to the Nazis and otherwise representing the good, decent folk of Deutschland? Do you know what the name of the political opposition party was? The Social Democrats. I wish I was making that up. That's what they were called, the Social Democratic Party. They had every opportunity to stop Hitler, but they didn't do anything about it. But what they were concerned about was maintaining their own perks. Those guys, as far as they were concerned, well, we've had rabble-rousers in the past, and, well, we dealt with it, and vote for us in November. That's what the German Social Democrats were talking about in the 1920s and the 1930s. I guess as far as they were concerned, as long as Adolf Hitler hadn't gotten around to killing them, he couldn't be too much of a threat, right? They were playing footsie with evil. They were playing games with a man who was not playing with them. And in the end, they bore the consequences. What a shame the rest of the world had to share in the punishment. See, that's what happens when you refuse to punish white supremacy. When you allow white supremacist immunity from law, when you allow them to have no consequences for their crimes, everyone suffers. So the idiots who are running around saying, well, the January 6th insurrection failed, most attempts to overthrow governments failed the first couple of times. People need to practice it before they get it right. But the point that I'm trying to get across is it doesn't matter if it was 150 years ago in the US, 100 years ago in Germany, or just 6 months ago. You see that in every instance, the global system of white supremacy is trying to find some way to preserve the very benefits that it bestows on those classified as white, and it will kill itself in the effort to do so. In every case, be it the Civil War in America, be it the Beer Hall Putsch in Germany, or be it the Capitol Hill insurrection, in every case, everybody knows what the laws are. They quote what the laws are. But the problem, of course, is under white supremacy, it is not a government of laws. It is a government of men, white men. And that being the case, the laws do not matter. What matters is whether or not white supremacy is being threatened. That's the reason why there was no military response in anticipation of those thugs coming to Washington, because as it stands, if the whip changes hands, that's not a threat to white supremacy. Black people being empowered is. Black people, especially young black people, fighting to put an end to their oppression and subjugation, that is a threat to white supremacy. So you better believe if 5 black folks get together on a street corner, the National Guard's going to be called out. Before it's all over, you're going to have the very good white liberals who are pretending to be so indignant about the inaction to punish the January 6th traitors. You're going to be having those people making arguments for why nothing being done is the right thing to do. Oh, before it's all over, don't be surprised when you see members of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and such being shown on CNN and MSNBC and on 60 Minutes and such, and explaining to everyone how, things are well, don't worry, people have learned their lesson, and with all of this should be put behind us. Before it's all over, you're going to be hearing that crap from the very people who are telling you today that they're so indignant. They'll go right along with it because they always have. But the danger is real for us as well. Just because the white supremacists are not concerned about the consequences of their actions doesn't mean that we can afford to be so reckless. Their survival may not matter to them, but ours matters to us. You make sure you carry the implements of personal protection at all times, for yourself and those that you care about. The white supremacists are going to be trying to make sure that they bolster their little courage and show people you need to take us seriously. We understand that the very individuals who have never treated us with anything resembling justice cannot be counted upon to actually punish the white supremacists. They're trying to figure out how to make nice with them so they can all go back to beating up on us full time. That's what the goal here is. Same as it was with Lincoln. Same as it was with the Weimar Republic. Same as it was with Jim Crow Joe. We need to go back to normal. That's all that stupid talk about, oh my God, the insurrection. If we could just go back to normal, go back to the way things were before. What the hell are you talking about? Before Donald Trump, you had Barack Obama sitting on his hands while black folks were being murdered in the streets. Oh yeah, that's the normal that they're talking about. We don't need white people killing other white folks. We need to go back to normal and be killing the niggers. That's what they mean. Let's get back to normal. Let's get back to the way things are supposed to be. These are the members of the Congressional Black Caucus talking like this. And that tells you everything you need to know about them. Well, black empowerment's got other ideas. And letting white supremacy be the order of the day ain't one of them. Now, Jim Crow Joe and his buddies are already telegraphing exactly what's going on here. This is nothing more than a pathetic, feeble front for a massive effort to try to patch up whatever differences there may be between these two factions of white supremacists so they can go back to God's good work of oppressing and beating up on us. Well, even though you've got this white supremacist government determined not to impose consequences on these gun-toting lunatics, that doesn't mean that we can't. If somebody decides that they're going to be harming or threatening us, we have every right to make sure that there are consequences that go along with attempting to harm us or attempting to stand in the way of us enjoying our rights as we understand them to be. We have a right to our share of the world and the tangible benefits and prosperity that goes along with it. We have a right to be able to provide for ourselves and our loved ones and to ensure the future of our people. And if anybody decides that they're going to try to make any place in the world into a safe space for attacking black people and bestowing some sort of blanket immunity from law on those who think that they're going to harm us, what they'll find is there will be consequences for that.